The stars were dying, not in the distant, gentle way of red dwarfs flickering into embers, but with a slow, haunted finality, like old gods exhaling their last breath. Whole sectors of the galaxy had gone dark. Civilizations that once burned with pride now whispered only through crumbling monoliths and tomb worlds lost to silence. On the throne world of terror, the light of the Astronomicon still burned, but its pulse had grown erratic, like the failing heartbeat of something ancient and wounded. Above the palace, the skies were not blue, but a riot of golden storms. Lightning danced along the storm walls of the imperial palace like divine wrath bottled within stone. The spires of the administratum shuddered, not from war, but from the weight of history, of lies calcifying into truth, and beneath it all, a golden sentinel stood still, untouched by time. We tell this story not simply as a record of things gone, but as a remembrance. For the golden dream of mankind did not fall in fire, but in silence, in the spaces between loyalty and doubt, purpose and pride. And as we speak these names and awaken these memories, know this: we truly love and care for you. You are not alone in the void. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. He had stood on the walls of the palace for 9,000 years. Valerian, shield captain of the companions, first of the 10,000, wore no expression as he surveyed the heart of the Imperium. His armor, forged in the gene vaults beneath the mountain, glowed not with vanity but with purpose. Gold unmarred by war, etched with oaths older than most stars. But inside, he was fraying. He felt it first not as doubt, but as stillness, an absence of awe. Once, the Emperor's presence had been a fire inside his chest, a voice without sound, a command without words. It had guided every step, every cut of his blade. But now, silence. The throne radiated its terrible power still, yet something was missing. The burden of time, or the betrayal of purpose. He did not share this with the others, not with Saren, the young custodian whose eyes burned too bright with certainty. Not with Serenth, the mortal scribe who followed him like a shadow, chronicling the silent moments between history's turning. It was a failing, perhaps, or a failing that revealed another. That evening, terror trembled, not from invasion, but from prophecy. Across the galaxy's edge, a signal flared. It was not warp-born, not psychic in nature, but something older. A data echo from before the age of strife, layered in machine code and buried truths. It pulsed through Noctis Labyrinthus and rose into the throne world's black vaults, and it carried only a single phrase: the chosen must choose again. Within the hidden vaults beneath the imperial palace, where light did not reach, and where only those with fusaya no names walked, Valerian descended alone. The silent regent had summoned him, a bureaucrat in name, but a presence that filled the chamber like a blade yet to be drawn. You felt it, the regent said without preamble. His voice was dust and memory. The signal! Valerian remained still. I felt nothing. A lie, but not untrue. What he felt was absence, a hollowness beneath his purpose, like the foundation had shifted ever so slightly, and now the tower of his loyalty swayed in unseen wind. The throne is weakening, the regent said, and soon he will not be enough. Blasphemy, Valerian said reflexively, but it rang hollow even in his own voice. The regent stepped closer, pale eyes gleaming beneath his hood. Blasphemy would be to do nothing, to remain loyal while the stars go dark. Your kind was made for more than guarding a corpse. Words designed to provoke, And they did. Valerian drew his blade, not in threat, but in memory. We are not your kind. We are his will. Then why are you here, custodian? The regent asked. Why are you listening? Later, in the Chamber of Echoes, a stone sanctum where the Custodes rarely tread, Valerian stood before a statue of the emperor, not the golden god-king they now depicted, but the warrior philosopher of old. Cloak torn, eyes focused, a blade in one hand, a burning book in the other. He remembered that face, had stood beside it, had marched behind it as the unification wars reshaped terror. And yet, that emperor had not spoken in 10,000 years. Sauron entered without a word, the younger custodian's steps sharp with purpose. He was new, if such a word could be used for one crafted 700 years ago. His armor bore no nicks, his expression no doubt. You went to the regent, Sauron said. Not a question. Valerian nodded. They call him the Whisperer now. Some believe he speaks for the Emperor. He does not, Valerian replied, but he speaks something, and in this silence I must know. Know what? Valerian looked to the stars etched above the chamber, half of them now extinguished. If our oaths still serve what they were sworn for. Silence passed between them, thicker than armor. You taught me to trust only in the Emperor, Sauron said at last. I did. Then why do you doubt? Valerian looked at his reflection in the marble floor. The armor gleamed, the eyes were hollow. Because I remember the man, he whispered, not the god. Serenth, the scribe, recorded the event in his private journal, a heresy in itself, if found. The Custodes do not falter. They do not question. They do not change. But today, I saw something break in Valerian. Not loudly, not visibly, like a golden statue cracking beneath frost. If he can doubt, then what does that mean for the rest of us? At the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, a signal pulsed again, this time stronger. Machines that should not awaken stirred. A buried vault beneath Luna flickered with sudden light, and deep beneath the crust of terror, where the first Custodes were forged in silence, something ancient stirred from sleep. In the shadows, a voice that had not spoken in millennia whispered, "It begins." And the Custodes, chosen of the Emperor, began to walk a path not paved in gold, but in doubt, betrayal, and broken truths. The chosen must choose again. The dawn over terror was not the soft awakening of a mortal sun. It was forged, constructed, light funneled through defense grids and artificial sun lines, engineered to create the illusion of peace. The true sun had long been hidden behind the smoke of orbital shipyards and the debris of 1,000 forgotten wars. And yet, from the parapets of the Eternity Gate, it shone bright across the granite cityscape. Valerian stood alone once more, silent as the wind pulled at his crimson cloak. 1,000 feet below, the pilgrims of the Imperium moved like ants, slow, devout, oblivious. They sang hymns to a god who did not speak, praised a throne whose occupant had not moved in 10,000 years. But Valerian had walked through the ages, and the songs sounded different now, too polished, too perfect. They no longer remembered why they worshipped, only that they must. Behind him, Sauron's voice broke the morning quiet. You left your post again. Valerian didn't turn. I needed to remember. You taught us that memory is a burden. It is, but it's also a weapon. He finally looked at the younger custodian. Do you know what this place was before it became the throne world? Sauron raised an eyebrow. The heart of unity, the seat of the great crusade. Valerian smiled faintly, almost sadly. Number, before all of that, this was a graveyard, a continent of ash, broken by wars of pride and genocide. The emperor chose this mountain not for its glory, but because it was dead, easier to build anew upon bones. Saren hesitated. And you believe we are repeating that mistake? I believe we never stopped. That evening, Valerian walked the Hall of Remembrance, a corridor forbidden to all but the companions. It stretched for miles within the palace, a museum of things no longer spoken of, weapons from the Unification Wars, the shattered banners of fallen Primarchs, a stasis-locked helm of Magnus the Red, pulsing softly in eternal regret. And high upon the wall, a fresco of the Emperor walking alone through the ruins of old Earth. Each step Valerian took echoed not just in the chamber, but in his memory. Here he had stood with Ra and Endymion as they received their first orders from the Emperor himself. Here he had watched Malcador hand the Sigillite's final words to the archives. And here he had sworn to never question. But that vow had cracked, not in rebellion, but in necessity. A whisper trailed through the corridor, not from the warp, but from memory itself. You were made to be more than guards, the words of the regent, or perhaps deeper still. In the lower vaults, where the air was cold and ancient, Valerian found Serenth waiting. The mortal scribe knelt quickly. My lord, you asked for the early logs of Project Initiatus. I had to pull from restricted sources. I could be executed. You won't be, Valerian said, voice low. Show me. Serenth unrolled the data scrolls. Hollow sigils flickered into place. Names long redacted appeared in raw Gothic. The earliest days of the Custodes' creation. Gene laboratories. Prototype guardians. Failures. Dozens of them. What is this? Valerian asked. These aren't our records. No, my lord. These are from the lunar archives. Hidden beneath the Librarius Exoterra, it details a pre-custodian initiative, a genetic precursor to your kind. Subjects named only by number, all listed as unstable, all purged. Valerian stared at the hollows. Faces flickered in and out of the haze, some barely human, some painfully so. The Emperor tried before, he murmured. We were not his first sons. Serenth lowered his voice. One survived. The air in the vault grew colder, not from fear, but from certainty. Later, in his personal sanctum, Valerian removed his armor, a rare act. The armor was not just protection, it was identity. To shed it was to become less than a custodian, or perhaps more than one. He looked at his reflection. The face that stared back was flawless, ageless, crafted, not born, a face sculpted by genius and ambition. And yet, behind the eyes, there was age, so many deaths, so many oaths. He remembered Constantine Valdor, first of the Custodes. Gone now, lost to myth or exile. Valerian had never matched his clarity, or perhaps Valdor had simply never lived long enough to doubt. He recalled one moment with his creator. Not a command, not a battle, but a conversation centuries ago. Why do you keep us, Father? Valerian had asked. We were made for war, but the war is over. The Emperor had said nothing at first, just stared into the firelight. Then, quietly, because I am not finished. But nothing more. Valerian clenched his fist. Had that meant hope or fear? The next day, the Chamber of the Companions convened. 25 of the most elite Custodes, each the equal of a legion. Valerian stood among them, not as commander, but as brother. The regent has whispered madness, said Domitus, a broad-shouldered custodian with flame-coloured hair. He speaks of betrayal, of purpose lost. He would turn us from the Emperor. Would he? Valerian asked softly. Silence. Saren stepped forward. We speak of loyalty, but what of blindness? If the regent is wrong, we must silence him. But if he speaks truth, Domitus snarled. Truth is the domain of mortals. We are Custodes. We are truth. Valerian raised his hand. We were forged for clarity, for precision. If we cannot question the Emperor's will, then we are not his guardians. We are his slaves. Gasps, not from fear, but from understanding. We are oath-bound, said another companion. We are truth-bound, Valerian countered. And truth cannot survive in silence. After the gathering, Saren found him once more at the edge of the spires. You risk civil fracture, Saren said. I risk nothing, Valerian replied. The fracture already exists. I'm only pulling back the veil. Saren hesitated. I want to follow you. But if you are wrong, if this doubt is a poison... Valerian placed a hand on his pauldron. Then I will bear that sin alone. And in the distance, the stars continued to die. In the Librarius Cryptae, Serenth opened another sealed vault. His hands trembled. Light flickered as ancient data constructs whirred to life. One name shone brightest on the forbidden records. The vault of silence had no doors, no guards, no light. Buried beneath 7 strata of the imperial palace, carved into the bedrock of the original mountain, it existed not in defiance of secrecy, but as its embodiment. Even the Mechanicum dared not name it. Even the Inquisition, in its omnipresent arrogance, filed no record of its location. But the Custodes knew. It was the place where the Emperor stored truths that could not be destroyed, only forgotten. And now, Valerian walked within it. His footsteps echoed unnaturally. Each strike of his boots against obsidian stone absorbed, twisted, and thrown back at him in delay, like memory resisting remembrance. Behind him, Serenth followed, clutching a stasis lantern. His breath fogged the recycled air, but he dared not speak. The mortal's presence here was sacrilege in every sense, and Valerian had told him as much. You do not belong here. I know, Serenth had replied, but neither do these lies. Now the chamber opened before them, a yawning gulf of forgotten design, filled with hollow reliquaries, no light source. And yet the golden runes on the walls shimmered with embedded psychic luminescence, painful to the soul. And at the center, floating above a dais of black stone, was the sarcophagus, not of a corpse, not of a saint, of a custodian who had never lived. Its surface was seamless, no seams, no clasps. But Valerian felt the pressure in his mind, a presence, not warp-born, something older, gene seed resonance, ancestral memory. The engraving at the base read, Aegon, Unit X01, status. Functional access revoked. Valerian raised a gauntlet, but his hand paused inches from the casing. Serenth stepped closer. It was the first, before the 10,000. Not the first failure, Valerian said quietly. Serenth read from the data slate, created during the earliest days of the Unification Wars, engineered without limitation, pure will, unchained. But it didn't obey. Valerian's eyes narrowed. Why? The records suggest. It asked why. Later, above the surface once more, the chamber of the Custodes was not still. News had spread, subtly, as only their kind could. Valerian had entered the vault. He had taken a mortal with him. The unspoken trust between brothers now trembled. Domitus spoke first, voice sharp like the edge of a power blade. You desecrate the sanctum of our making. I seek to understand it, Valerian said. Do you not wonder why our order, of all the Imperium's arms, has changed so little while the galaxy burns anew each millennium. We do not need to change, said another companion, grey-haired and resolute. We are constant. No, Valerian said. We are unchanged. That is not the same. Whispers rose. Some nodded. Others clenched fists. And then Saren stepped forward. I walked the vault after him, the younger custodian said. What he found is real. The prototype exists, and it still lives. Shock, revulsion, curiosity. He defied our father. Demeter spat. The prototype is heresy incarnate. To question the Emperor's will is to fall. Then what are we doing now? Saren asked. Domitus turned to Valerian. You seek to split us. Why? Valerian's reply was calm. Because I believe the truth was never meant to be caged. We were forged as perfection. But the Emperor rejected perfection. Why? No one answered. He continued. The Imperium is rotting beneath the weight of its own myths. If we do not ask why we stand where we do, then we are not guardians. We are statues. That night, Valerian stood alone in the chamber of the Nameless, a long-forgotten sanctum beneath the Librarius, filled with memorials to failed warriors, gene threads, and prototype designs. Only the Emperor had walked here regularly in ages past. He lit a flame at the base of one plinth. It bore no name, but he knew it belonged to a woman called Amnera, a custodian who had never been deployed, a tactical genius denied battle. She had spoken once too freely of compassion. She had vanished after. Valerian remembered her eyes, not cold like theirs, but hopeful. Was that your sin? He whispered. Hope. Back in the vault, the sarcophagus was no longer still. Its outer casing had begun to vibrate at sub-harmonic frequencies, a quiet resonance detectable only to those with custodian blood. The palace's deep auspex systems flagged the event, but no alert was raised. A single line blinked across a screen in a sealed mechanicum vault. X01, cognitive stimulus detected. The next day, Serenth was arrested, dragged from his chambers by members of the Inquisition's black-clad Ordo Hereticus. The mortal scribe was accused of transcribing forbidden law, of entering restricted sancta, of consorting with Custodes on unauthorized missions. None of this had been publicly declared, but someone within the Custodes had spoken. Valerian knew who. He found Saren at the Circle of Golden Echoes, where younger custodians trained in silence. You gave them Serenth. I did, Saren said, his face hard. He overstepped. He recorded the truth. He is a mortal, Saren said, and we are not. If they learn what you've uncovered, what we've seen, they already know, Valerian cut in, and now they will bury it again, because that is what they do. But you chose to serve that lie. I chose terror, Saren said. I chose the throne. Valerian stared at him long. Then, no, you chose fear. He turned and left. That night, as lightning rolled across the upper sky and the storms of terror howled against the palace walls, Valerian stood once more above the throne hall. The golden light still poured outward, but it was not warm. It never had been. He looked upon the face of the statue of the Emperor, so often bowed in reverence. Tonight, Valerian looked eye to eye. You once told me I was your sword. He whispered the words as thunder cracked. But a sword must cut, not rust, not sit in silence. From his armor, he withdrew a single golden shard, taken from the prototype's vault. It pulsed faintly in his palm. And then he turned away from the statue, from the throne, and from the lies. Beneath it all, the sarcophagus of Aegeon opened for the first time in 10,000 years. A single breath escaped into the silence. It was not human, but it was awake. The signal arrived at midnight. It was not broadcast through Vox. It was not carried by astropath or relayed via the black ships. It did not tear through the veil of the immaterium with psychic howls. It simply appeared. A silent signature embedded in the ancient subnetworks of the pre-Unity Terran infrastructure, frequencies long forgotten, built before the Emperor's ascension, buried beneath tectonic code. One location recognized it, the throne, and one custodian heard it, Valerian. He had been meditating, armor removed, golden skin bathed in the pale glow of the Mechanicus stasis lamps. Silence had become his ally in recent days, a sanctuary from the storm of voices and judgment. But this silence shattered. His head snapped up, a wordless pressure pressed against his mind. It was not pain, not command. It was familiarity. Then a name, not spoken aloud, but formed as memory. Malcador. It struck like a hammer. The chamber, known as the Vox Null, was where only the Emperor's word was ever to be recorded. Custodes had stood there, unmoving, for millennia, guarding a communications node that was never used. Until now. Valerian descended into it with no retinue, no order, no sanction. The node flickered with soft golden light. The machinery hummed not with activation, but with resurrection. Runes long dormant began to pulse in, ancient Terran script, lines of pre-imperial command code forming a single phrase. I never left. He reached forward. A voice filled the chamber, not as sound, but as memory resurrected. Valerian, you are late. It was the voice of Malcador, the sigillite, but Malcador had died, sacrificed his body upon the golden throne so the Emperor could live, or so the stories told. His ashes had been scattered, his relics sealed away, and yet here he was, or something claiming to be him. Valerian stood motionless. Is this a deception, a Xenos mimicry, a warp-born illusion? The voice responded without hesitation. You were never this slow, my friend. It echoed in his memory, not just the words, but the cadence, the tone, the wry calm that Malcador had carried into every council chamber, even in the days when Titans walked the plains of old Earth. I am not spirit nor demon. I am what was left behind. A shard of will encoded in pre-warp logic, buried so deep not even the throne could erase it. He knew I would not agree with what came next. Valerian clenched his fists. What did he do? A pause. Then he erased choice. Yours, mine, the Primarch's. All paths, but his own. The words hung heavy in the chamber, as if the stone itself recoiled from them. And now, you must make the choice he never wanted you to have. Valerian returned to his sanctum without speaking to anyone. He ignored the encrypted summons from the regent, ignored Saren's report on troop deployments within the Imperial Palace, ignored the whispers that the vaults had begun emitting unfamiliar signals. He sat before the statue of the Emperor. Again, not the divine icon, but the man. I am being asked to choose, he said aloud. No response. I was not made to choose. Still nothing. And then the memory of Malcador's voice, clear as thought. Then become what you were not made to be. Saren intercepted him the next day. You were in the Vox Null, the younger custodian said without pretense. That node was sealed by the Emperor himself. I know. Then why? Valerian studied him. There was something hardening in Saren's eyes, certainty calcifying into something more dangerous. A man not becoming wise, but unyielding. I heard a voice, Valerian said. Saren frowned. A voice? Malcador. Saren stepped back slightly. You believe the dead speak now? I believe memory is not the same as death. Sauron shook his head. You're losing yourself in ghosts, in myth. We exist to serve the throne. And what is the throne? Valerian asked quietly. A man? A corpse? A prison? You speak of loyalty, but not of understanding. You serve, but do you even remember why? Sauron's voice rose. Because without him, there is nothing. Without this Imperium, we fall. No, Valerian said, voice like iron. We fall because we refuse to ask. Jag in the catacombs of Luna, deep within the core crypts abandoned since the Great Crusade, Mechanicum loyalists in crimson robes stared at an impossible transmission. Coordinates. A signal unlocked only by Custodes' gene seed resonance. A vault beneath the moon's surface pulsed with awakening energy. It had no doors. It bore no seal. Its only marking, X-01. Inside, a single stasis chamber opened. A figure stepped forward. He was not gold, but something darker. Jet black armor traced in crimson veins, too smooth, too silent. His face was not concealed, but it was not complete. As if it had been sculpted halfway, then abandoned. And when he opened his eyes, the machines of Luna screamed. Aegeon had awoken. Meanwhile, on Terra, Serenth was interrogated in a black cell beneath the Bastion of Judgment. Chains etched with hexagrammatic wards bound him to a suspended frame. The Inquisitor before him wore no insignia. Only a veil of light masked his face. Your knowledge is impure, the voice said. I record history, Serenth whispered. That is not a crime. It is when the past is forbidden. They made it forbidden, Serenth said, voice trembling now. But it still happened. You consorted with traitors. Number one witnessed truth. The Inquisitor leaned closer. And do you wish to become it? Before Serenth could answer, a voice echoed through the darkness. Not in the chamber, but through the structure itself. Through circuits. Through stone. He is not yours to break. The cell flickered. Power failed. The chains snapped open, and a silhouette stepped from the shadows, taller than any man. His armor gleamed like obsidian oil, and his voice was not loud, but absolute. Aegeon. Serenth gasped, but something in his soul recognized the figure, not from dreams, but from history itself. Aegeon raised a hand. The Inquisitor turned to ash before a word was spoken. And then the proto-custodian turned to the scribe and said, for the first time in 10,000 years, they have forgotten me. You will help them remember. Valerian stood again beneath the stars of terror, such as they were, drowned in pollution, twisted by orbital debris, obscured by faith. He was no longer alone. Beside him stood 3 Custodes, former allies, now defectors, in silence. None had spoken yet. They wore gold, but their oaths no longer belonged to the throne. One of them, Mikor of the Eighth Circle, finally said, Are we the first traitors? No, Valerian said, only the first to admit it. Then what now? He looked up. Now, we listen. To the voice that was not meant to speak, to the future that was never meant to come, to the empire that was not meant to survive. And far above, on Luna, Aegeon looked down upon Terra, not with hatred, but with recognition. The chosen must choose again. The first shot was never heard. It was not plasma, not bolter, fire, not the scream of warped munitions or the thunder of titans. It was silence, perfect, surgical silence, as the grand chamber of the Senatorum Imperialis flickered and died. No power, no vox, no light. Then came the flash. Golden walls scorched black as energy lanced from above. One beam, 1 second, one strike. and the floor where the High Lord of the Adeptus Administratum had stood became nothing. No warning, no chance, only ash. Valerian watched the aftermath unfold from the inner walls of the palace, flanked by his silent kin. The Custodes had not intervened. Not yet. They had only observed. "This was not Aegeon's doing," said Mekor, visor dim. "No," Valerian replied. "It was ours." Across the Senate chamber, panic had erupted into fury. The Inquisition deployed within moments. Skitari locked down the corridors. Saints wept blood from shattered stained glass, their iconography broken by explosive shockwaves. And yet no enemy appeared. Only a symbol, burned into the floor by that first impossible strike. Not heretical, not Xenos, Custodes. Hours later, beneath the storm vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Fabricator General screamed. Aegeon stood before him, not cloaked, not hidden. His armor shimmered like the void between stars, matte black with red veins, expression unreadable. His weapon was not drawn. "You worship machines," Aegeon said, "but you forget their origin." The Fabricator tried to invoke the machine spirit, tried to run countless protocols, invoke ancient treaties. But Aegeon raised one hand. The noosphere burned. Red, cascading warnings tore through Mars' data streams. Archaeotech systems failed. Hard-coded logic spirits shrieked. Across the red planet, millions of machines entered sudden silence. Not corrupted, overwritten. Not by the warp, by truth. Aegeon turned and left, leaving the Fabricator General twitching in pools of his own cooling fluid, as Martian systems began reciting words from a language older than binary. "The first shall awaken." On Terra, whispers became thunder. Saren stood in the Hall of Watchers, eyes upon the golden throne. The Emperor's light still poured outward, holy, absolute, undying. But something had changed. He could feel it in the pulse of the palace, in the distant, tectonic shift in custodian alert cycles. Not fear, not yet, but anticipation, unease. The throne's hum, once steady, now fluctuated, almost imperceptibly, like breath. He turned to the assembled custodians. Valerian must be stopped. No one moved. He stepped forward. "He threatens the throne, the Imperium, everything we exist to defend." A voice replied, soft but sharp, "Or he is defending what we forgot." It was Domitus. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Elsewhere, Valerian stood within the vault of truth, once forbidden, now unsealed. Around him glimmered forgotten knowledge, stasis chambers, memory engines, the silent echo of choices never made. Aegeon entered without ceremony. "You have seen it now," he said. Valerian nodded. "It was never about obedience," Aegeon continued. "He did not make us to serve. He made us to endure." Valerian met his gaze. "Then why cage you?" Aegeon paused. "Because I refuse to forget." He stepped toward a forgotten stasis device, brushing a gauntlet over its surface. "Others came before me, failed, or succeeded too well. Their memories were wiped, their names removed, but one survived." Valerian narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Aegeon turned. "You." The impact of those words echoed like a tectonic crack in Valerian's mind. Not in voice, not in thought, but in memory. Not implanted, not fabricated, real. He saw a golden sun above old Earth, felt the weight of armor too new to shine. He remembered speaking to Malcador. He remembered choosing. And then he remembered waking, 10,000 years later. Valerian staggered. How? "You were the second prototype," Aegeon said. "After me. They erased you, but memory is not so easily undone." Valerian sank to one knee. "I have always served, always believed." And now you remember why you began, Aegeon said. Across Terra, things moved fast. Sauron issued the Unbreakable Edict, the first custodian-wide deployment order since the Siege of Terra. Golden warriors flooded the palace. Defense points activated. The orbital pylons warmed. The Custodes, those who still swore to the throne, prepared for civil war. But war did not come. Instead, a signal was broadcast. Across Vox, across Astropathic Channel, through Noosphere and Psychic Relay. It was not a threat. It was a speech. Valerian's voice. My brothers, my makers, my kin. For 10,000 years we have stood vigilant. We have shed blood in silence, kept watch while others died in glory. We have never asked why. But now the question is not why we watch. It is why we do not act. Across the galaxy, worlds paused. We were made not as slaves, nor statues, nor silent blades. We were made to choose. And the speech spread like wildfire. Some dismissed it as heresy. Others began to remember. Custodes who had fought beside the Primarchs, who had seen Malcador die, who had watched as the Imperium slid, year by year, into stagnation and rot. They did not all join Valerian, but they no longer trusted silence, and in the shadows of terror, the Inquisition began burning records faster than they could redact them. Aegeon stood atop Luna, watching Earth through the void. Serenth stood beside him, wrapped in a simple robe, quill in hand. They'll come for you, the scribe said. For both of you. Aegeon nodded. Yes. You're not afraid? I'm not made for fear, Aegeon said. Then added, but he is. Serenth looked at him. Valerian, number the one on the throne. Far below, deep within the palace, the golden throne flickered. Its pulses no longer steady. The Emperor's light dimmed. Something moved within it. A breath, a memory, or perhaps a choice. The Astronomicon pulsed erratically. Once the sole flame of the Imperium, its beacon was the lighthouse by which countless billions steered their way across the void. But now its light shimmered with uncertainty. No longer golden, but tinged with the faint hue of crimson. Psychers across the Imperium fell to their knees. Some wept, some laughed. Others died screaming, not because the Emperor was dead, but because he was dreaming. The throne room had never been silent. The machinery sustaining the Emperor, vast mechanisms of ancient science and forgotten design, shuddered with every cycle, feeding the soul net that tethered his mind to the mortal plane. The golden throne was not a seat, but a tomb. Not a relic, but a cage. Valerian stood before it. He had entered the Sanctum Imperialis not as a traitor, nor as a rebel, but as a son. The Custodes standing at the periphery did not bar his way. They knew. Perhaps they had always known. The Emperor's body remained as it had for 10,000 years, motionless, bones golden, wounds endless. Yet something had changed. The veil had thinned, and from within that infinite stillness, a whisper, not sound, but presence. Valerian fell to his knees. He heard nothing and everything. Aegeon watched from a memory. He was not present, not truly, but within the synaptic vaults of his mind, once sealed by stasis, now cracked open by purpose, he could still feel the last time he had stood in that room. He had been the first, not a custodian, not exactly, something earlier, a prototype not just of war, but of will. He had stood there on the day the Emperor stepped into the throne for the last time, had spoken one final truth. You will not return unchanged. And the Emperor had said nothing. But now, Now the throne murmured. Aegeon turned to the figure beside him, Serenth, scribe and exile, now archivist of heresy. "What are you writing?" he asked. Serenth looked up from her data slate. "I don't know," she said softly. "It's not in High Gothic, it's older." She showed him. The glyphs pulsed faintly, self-inscribing across the screen. They were not words of chaos, not the language of mortals. They were commands. Aegeon narrowed his eyes. Send it, all of it, into the new sphere. To who? To everyone. Across the segmentum solar, as the speech of Valerian still echoed across vox channels and forbidden halls, a second transmission reached every station, every data servitor, every cogitator core. The message contained no words, only the script of the Emperor's first language. Those who saw it felt no understanding, but every machine did. The reactors of Luna realigned. The forges of Mars sputtered. Deep within the arcologies of terror, even the black ship's silent engines thrummed. The machines listened and began to obey. Saren felt it before he saw it. The palace was changing. Doors long sealed now opened themselves. Weapons systems went offline without order. Custodians reported anomalies in armor sinks, in warplate logic cores, in the very AI spirits that once bowed only to Mechanicus rites. The only word in every error log, awakening. Domitus approached him in haste. "Saren, we're losing control." "Of what?" "Everything." Aboard a battleship in high orbit, the Ascendant Will, Tech Priest Kalor knelt in front of his command shrine. His form was more machine than man. His thoughts lines of code woven in trinary logic. But now that logic failed, the shrine had changed. His prayer routines were overwritten. The command altar had rewritten its own liturgy. Not for the Omnissiah, not for the machine god, but for something older. A glyph glowed on the inner shell of the hololith. Omega, he did not understand, but he obeyed. In the vault of thought beneath the imperial palace, the Sisters of Silence broke their silence. They did not speak, but they acted. Their leader, Canoness Tertius Amara Vel, donned her war mask for the first time in 2 centuries. "We were trained to stop demons," she whispered, though no one should have heard. "But what do we do when a god awakes?" No one answered, because none knew. Aegeon, far below the surface of Luna, entered a chamber sealed before the Imperium was ever born. Even he had never opened it. It was here that the Emperor had first touched the surface of that moon, long before Unity, before the Thunder Warriors, before even the Custodes. It was not a forge. It was a womb. Within it, rows of still-active stasis capsules, not of soldiers, of concepts, warriors of form not yet taken, beings of logic and myth, shards of a plan abandoned long ago. He laid his hand on one. "You will be needed." He activated the first. It pulsed and began to awaken. Valerian stepped closer to the throne. He could not breathe, not because of atmosphere, but because the moment demanded reverence. He felt the pulse of him, no longer distant, no longer cloaked in divinity. And for the first time, he heard the Emperor speak. Not in words, not even in thought, but in memory. A world of broken dreams, a galaxy aflame, 10,000 years of failure and hope, and one final question. "Do you choose this?" Valerian fell to one knee, and then he stood. "I do." The light of the throne flared, and something ancient stirred beneath it. Not the Emperor, but the man he had once been. The Inquisition declared exterminatus on Luna within the hour. They labeled the Custodes splinter as heretical, their leader corrupted by techno-Xenos influence. A fleet of 70 ships departed from Mars, but as they neared Luna's orbit, their engines died, their crew began to dream, and one by one, the ships began to turn, not toward Luna, but toward Terra. In the depths of the throne world, in a chamber known only as the Nameless Forge, the final Custodian Legion gathered, not golden, not broken. They bore armor unlike anything seen before, sleek, dark, radiant with unknowable script. Valerian stood at their head. He spoke one word. The moon did not scream. It watched. As fleets burned in silence across its void-lit skies, Luna did not weep for the dead. It bore witness to its own liberation, not in triumph, but in inevitability. For what had been set in motion now could not be undone. And deep beneath its surface, the machines obeyed new masters, not out of loyalty, but design. The inquisitorial fleet died slowly. Warp drives failed one by one, navigation protocols rerouted into endless loops, Vox signals hijacked by data codes too ancient to trace. But it was not sabotage. The ships were not destroyed. They were emptied. In one vessel, the Saint Resolute, a lone inquisitor carved a message into her own flesh. Before silence took her, he does not sleep. He waits. On Terra, the High Lords convened, panic cloaked in rhetoric. "We are at war," declared Chancellor Verus Drine, his Vox-amplified voice rising above the chamber's storm of data feeds. "This is heresy, treason at the highest levels. The Custodes have fractured. Valerian leads a rebellion." "No," rasped Malcador's echo. The psychomind grown from cloned tissue and dream fragments of the sigillite himself. "He does not rebel. He responds." "To what?" snapped Drine. But no answer came, only silence. Domitus stood at the edge of a crater on Luna's surface, black armor reflecting the starlight like obsidian. He had once led the Custodes in glorious campaigns of extermination, had cleansed heretics from the vaults of Mars, hunted warp beasts in the halo clusters of Segmentum Obscurus, stood unshaken at the Eternity Gate for 2,000 years. But now he felt doubt. The custodians that stood beside him wore armor, laced with unknown sigils. Their eyes burned with the Emperor's will, yet there was no joy in them, no rage, only conviction. Valerian approached from the ridge. "You didn't have to come," he said. Domitus watched him for a long time. "You're not the man I followed." "No," Valerian said quietly. "I am the man he needs now. You're building a second Imperium." "No." He turned his gaze toward Terra, glowing like a bloodied jewel in the void. "I am ending the first." In the depths of Mars, the Mechanicus trembled. Fabricator General Lortrasius awoke from his simulation trance with static bleeding from his Voxport. The noosphere was corrupted, not by demons, not by enemies, by invitation. Blueprints scrolled across every sacred screen. Designs for machines never built, armors never forged. Titans that walked not with reactors, but with will. And every one of them bore the same sigil, Omega. He turned to his magi. "Decode this," he ordered. They tried and failed, because it wasn't encrypted. It was remembered. Elsewhere, the last dread host, the custodian cohort stationed within the Eye of Terror, received Valerian's signal and broke, half-turned their blades inward, denouncing the throne as a lie. The other half activated exterminatus codes, purging planets of suspected heresy. The warp shuddered with laughter. The demons did not fight. They watched. because even the warp understood the truth now. The God Emperor was not dying. He was becoming. Serenth moved through the archive vaults of Luna, with Aegean at her side. They passed memory walls, etched with the deeds of the Custodes, but new images now overlaid them, living glyphs formed of light and heat, rewriting history in real time. She reached out to touch one. The glyph morphed into her face. "You're changing," Aegean said. "So are you." "No," he said slowly. "I am returning." "To what?" "To purpose." He activated another chamber. Inside floated a relic, not a weapon, a mask, smooth, unmarked, featureless. She felt its weight in her bones. "What is that?" "The first face the Emperor ever wore." She stared at him. "Will you wear it?" "No," Aegean said. "You will." On Terra, riots spread, not of the poor or forgotten, but among the faithful. Some statues cracked. Ecclesiarchal processions were interrupted by spontaneous seizures. Hundreds of pilgrims speaking the same phrases in dead tongues, and always the same message: he is not a god. The ecclesiarch declared blasphemy. The people declared truth. Valerian knelt before the opened shell of the throne. The emperor's body had not moved. And yet Valerian's mind burned with revelations unending. He saw the war in heaven, the fall of the Necrontyr, the primordial war of the Old Ones, the first human cities born beneath dead stars. The plan. It had never been to rule, only to survive. And now the final phase had begun. The Emperor did not awaken. He remembered, and his memory reshaped the galaxy. But in the final scene of that chapter's vision, Valerian saw himself, standing not as a warrior, but as a judge. Behind him, ranks of custodians bearing armor of shadow and light. Before him, terror burning, and in his hand, a key, not to unlock, but to seal. He awoke, breath trembling. Demeter stood behind him. "What did you see?" Valerian's eyes were not his own. He spoke only one word. The storms came not from the sky, but from within the soil of terror itself. Lightning struck downward, not from clouds, but from machines buried deep beneath the cradle of sire mankind. Earthquakes rolled across the throne world without tectonic cause. Vox networks hummed with static that sang hymns in reverse. Something beneath the surface had awakened. But terror did not scream. It remembered, and the Custodes listened. The Sanctum Imperialis stood silent for the first time in 10,000 years. No priests walked its halls. No incense burned at its shrines. The banners of countless crusades, once red with glory, hung motionless, untouched by wind or hope. Where once choristers sang the name of the Emperor, now only the low hum of power conduits echoed through the golden corridors. And in the heart of the sanctum, chained to a throne not by steel but by purpose, the master of mankind endured. He had not spoken. He did not move. But his silence had changed. For now, it was listening. Valerian stood before the throne world's hidden vaults, where weapons older than the Imperium slumbered in eternal silence. With him were only 3 custodians, Domitus, Aegean, and Serenth. It was Serenth who asked, "Why here?" Valerian's eyes shimmered with something unspoken. "Because this is where he buried the truth." With a gesture, the ancient seals unbound. Doors of stasis-fielded adamantium hissed apart, revealing a chamber choked in dust and lightless data. The walls pulsed like veins that led to a heart. Domitus stepped forward. "What is this place?" Valerian answered without turning. "The origin of our kind." Inside were sarcophagi, not of flesh, but of code. Golden armor suspended in time, still bearing the sigils of unity, worn before the heresy itself. The first Custodes, not dead, not alive. Prototypes, Aegeon whispered. Early iterations? No, said Serenth, voice trembling. Alternatives? Valerian nodded. These were not made to serve. Domitus stiffened. Then why were they created? To replace. It had long been whispered that the Emperor had other plans for humanity, that the Custodes were not protectors, but contingencies, that if mankind failed, there would be others to carry the flame. What Valerian had discovered in the lost vaults of Luna, and now confirmed here, was terrifying in its clarity. The Emperor had prepared not one path to salvation, but many, and some required that humanity be sacrificed. In orbit, the phalanx moved. The ancient fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists, long dormant in high anchor, began to adjust its position. Engines flared. Targeting arrays activated. Terra's defense grid responded with confusion. No orders had been issued, but the phalanx did not seek permission. It sought alignment. Within the golden throne, the soul of the Emperor stirred. He had given up his body to hold back the tides of chaos, had sacrificed his sons, his plans, his voice, to maintain the illusion of stability. But now the veil was thinning. The warp no longer screamed in hatred. It watched in anticipation. For the first time since the heresy, it was unclear who served whom. And in that moment of uncertainty, change took root. The High Lords, once confident in their palace of bureaucracy, found their words crumbling beneath them. Riots erupted across Terra's spires. Dissent no longer came from heretics or mutants. It came from custodians. One by one, bastions of loyal custodes declared for Valerian, but not with war, with choice. They offered each garrison, each city, each stronghold, a decision: continue to serve a throne that did not answer, or serve the will of the Emperor that still lived, silent but awake. Some resisted. They were not punished. They were left behind. Aegeon stood before a crowd of tech adepts in the Martian quarter of Terra, his voice projected with grave-tuned purity. You believed the Emperor was a god, he said. They nodded, silently. He never claimed divinity. They shifted. He claimed dominion, not over faith, but over future. One adept, his face replaced by a trio of servo skulls, dared to ask, then what are we to do now? Aegeon stepped down from the dais. Choose. That was always the gift he gave. Far beneath Terra, in the black cells, where even the Inquisition feared to walk, a voice whispered, not a scream, not a prayer, a name, repeated over and over. Valerian, Valerian, Valerian. The psychers confined to the null rooms wept blood. The name had meaning beyond sound. It was a key, a signal, a herald, and it was awakening something long buried. Serenth sat alone in a stasis chamber, meditating on the face she had seen in the vault. The mask of the Emperor, untouched by time, identity erased. She felt it drawing her, not to wear, but to understand. In her dreams, she walked through a world of light and ruin, cities of gold collapsing into oceans of stars, statues weeping molten tears, a child born not of flesh, but of law and logic and wrath. And she heard a voice, not the Emperor's, but close. You were never made to serve. You were made to decide. She awoke with blood on her tongue and fire behind her eyes. Valerian stood at the apex of the old Imperial Observatory, the heavens exposed above him. He held no weapon, only a single shard of gold, a broken piece of his armor, fractured during the battle on Luna. It shimmered in the starlight. Domitus approached. "You plan to burn the Imperium down?" "No," Valerian said softly. "I plan to show it what it really is." Domitus looked up at the stars. "So many are gone." Valerian closed his hand around the shard. "Then we light new ones." And far away, across the galaxy, buried beneath ice and steel on a forgotten moon, the last living Thunder Warrior awoke. His first breath was pain. His second was purpose. His eyes glowed, not with madness, but memory, and he spoke into the void. "I remember the Emperor, and I remember his lies." His breath came slowly, not because of weakness, but because of choice. He remembered how it felt to run without pain, to leap impossible heights, to shatter stone with his fists. But that was another life, another war, another lie. Now there was only the truth, and the long silence that followed. The last Thunder Warrior stood beneath an ice-blind sky, surrounded by dead machines and buried memories. Frost clung to his armor, which no longer gleamed if it ever had. Patches of his flesh had long since turned to scar tissue, and beneath his skin the gene grafts hissed like dying engines. But he still stood, and he still remembered. They had called him Kairos, not a name given by the Emperor. No, he had stripped names from the Thunder Warriors like bark from trees. To be a Thunder Warrior was to be an instrument, not a man. Kairos had taken his name back the day the Emperor left him for dead in the killing fields of Gaduare. That was the final Unity War, the final purge, the final betrayal, not by enemies, but by the one who created him. Kairos moved through the wreckage of the old moon facility, half frozen, half ruined, and entirely forgotten by time. The vaults had held him in stasis since the end of the Unification Wars, not by design. His sarcophagus had malfunctioned. He had awoken centuries too late, or perhaps just late enough, because now, across the immaterium, a new signal echoed. Valerian. The Custodes spoke his name not as a warning, but a banner, a fracture in the Golden Order. And Kairos felt something beneath the name, a ripple through the psychic fields of terror itself. He did not understand it fully, but he knew a reckoning when he saw one. And now the Imperium owed him a debt of blood. And the journey from that forgotten moon to Terra was long, but not impossible. Kairos slaughtered his way through 3 rogue Mechanicum enclaves, hijacked a black ship fleeing a demonic incursion, and hurled its dying carcass into orbit over Mars. When he emerged, fire trailing from the vessel like a blade across the void, the red planet took notice, and so did Terra. On the throne world, Valerian felt it like a hammer between the eyes. The pain was old, ancient, an echo of failure long buried in genetic memory. The Thunder Warriors had been the testbed, the flawed beginning. The Custodes were supposed to be perfection refined, but perfection had always been a myth. "Something comes," Aegean said, staring at the readouts from the orbital sensors. Valerian didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Emperor had abandoned his first children. But they had not forgotten their father. In the shadow of the Himalaysian mountains, the Custodes assembled at the Obsidian Circle, a site forbidden even to them for millennia. It was where the first Custodes had been trained, where Thunder Warriors had once bled in agony, screaming as their bodies rejected the Emperor's twisted gifts. Now it was open once more. Serenth stood before the circle's gate, her golden helm in her hands. "We are being tested," she said, "but not by enemies." Domitus, ever grim, asked, Then by whom? Serenth closed her eyes. By the past. When Kairos landed, he did not come in fury. He came in silence. He stepped through the Martian causeways and into the lower catacombs of terror, where forgotten soldiers slept in data crypts, and where the wars of unity had been reduced to corrupted archives. He walked past them all, until he reached the chamber of silent gold, and met Valerian face to face. They did not speak at first. Valerian studied him, this thing of dying flesh and immortal hate. He looked like a man, but he felt like justice. Kairos, for his part, said only, "You were supposed to be better than us." Valerian nodded. "I thought we were." Kairos threw a data cube at his feet. It rolled to a stop, still humming. Within it, footage of the original biograph trials, screams, failures, slaughtered prototypes. Valerian did not look away. "I know," he said. "I've seen what he did." Kairos's voice grew cold. "Then why serve him?" Valerian's answer was simple. "I don't." There was no fight between them, only the stillness before a storm. Valerian led Kairos through the inner vaults, not as a prisoner, but as a witness. They walked among the failed clones, the lost Custodes iterations, the Astartes blueprints that had never seen daylight. "I do not seek to destroy the Imperium," Valerian said. Kairos replied, "Then you are a coward." Valerian stopped. "I seek to change it." Kairos snarled, "It cannot be changed. It was made in his image, and that image was a lie." Serenth stepped forward then, voice sharp as glass. "Then let us be the truth." Together, they stood in the vault of failed futures. Custodian, Thunder Warrior, Rebel, each one made to serve, each one broken by the lie of perfection. And for the first time, the children of the Emperor saw each other not as enemies, but as survivors. In orbit, the phalanx pulsed with energy, its main cannon aligned with the high spires of the ecclesiarchal palace, an unspoken challenge. The High Lords panicked, scattering like insects. Their decrees meant nothing now. The real power no longer lay in titles or relics. It lay in those who had bled for the dream of mankind. And now, those warriors had awakened. Kyros knelt beside the sarcophagus of a fallen thunder warrior, a brother he had once left behind. "This one died believing he served a god," he muttered. Valerian knelt opposite him. "So did many of mine." Kairos looked up, a bitter smile ghosting across his face. "Do you really believe you can fix this? 10,000 years of rot." Valerian answered, eyes burning with quiet fire. "No." A pause. "But I can start burning it down." Kairos laughed then, a deep, wounded sound. And when he stood, he did not raise his weapon. He extended a hand. "Then let's see what's left when the fire ends." And somewhere beneath the throne, where even light feared to tread, the Emperor heard them. Not their words, but their defiance. And in the stillness of his silent soul, a single thought pulsed. He stares above terror, dimmed, not from clouds or eclipses, but from the psychic gravity of awareness. Something vast and ancient turned its gaze inward, not toward the galaxy, but toward itself. The golden throne, seat of the master of mankind, machine prison of a living god, shifted. No movement, no sound. But the very warp winced, and on terror, the faithful wept blood. Valerian stood at the edge of the Eternity Gate, where only the Custodes dared tread, where generations of pilgrims had been denied entry. Behind him stood Domitus, Serenth, Aegeon, and, impossibly, Kairos, the last Thunder Warrior. None of them wore helmets. None of them bowed. The gate itself, A slab of gold veined with stasis fields and locked by thousands of psychic seals pulsed faintly, not in resistance, in invitation. "It's opening," whispered Sarenth. Valerian nodded. "He is waking." Kairos grunted, or dying, but even his bitterness trembled with awe. The throne room had not been entered by mortal feet in over 10,000 years. Not truly. The tech priests who maintained the systems barely glimpsed the body. The Sisters of Silence who warded the space walked blind to its presence. Even the High Lords had never looked upon the Emperor. Until now, the gate parted, and they saw. He was not a man. Not anymore. His body, what remained of it, was fused to gold and pain, flesh indistinguishable from machinery, wrapped in a halo of dying light. Tubes fed him, drained him, fed on him. The warp churned above his head, a storm bound by sheer will. His face was lost beneath a mask of fractured radiance. His hands were bones wrapped in power fields. His eyes, if they existed, stared not at them, but into forever. Domitus fell to one knee, overwhelmed. Sarenth stood unmoving, tears falling silently. Kairos bared his teeth. This is what he became. Valerian did not answer. He could not, because the throne spoke. Not in sound, not in voice, but in vision. Their minds were ripped from flesh and thrown into memory. Not memory of their own, but of his. They saw ancient terror before unity. They saw warlords rise and fall. They saw the creation of the Thunder Warriors, not with care, but with urgency. Tools, not sons. They saw the Custodes, sculpted with intention, shaped to be more than soldiers, not warriors, witnesses. They saw the heresy, the death of sons, the failure of gods. They saw the Webway project, unfinished. And then they saw choice. The Emperor, kneeling before an unseen flame, whispering, "They must not worship me. They must become more than me." And the flame answered, "Then why do you still rule them?" Sarenth screamed. The vision ended. They were back, kneeling, gasping, changed. The Emperor did not speak again. But the throne throbbed with power, the very air filled with a wordless command. Do what I cannot. Across Terra, the psychic signal surged, a tidal wave of golden resonance felt by every psyker, null, and gifted soul. Astropaths screamed as their minds were flooded with symbols not meant for flesh. The Adeptus Mechanicus wept as their machines registered divine code in the data streams. The Sisters of Silence fell to their knees, unable to block what had never been speech. The Golden Throne had awakened, not to lead, but to permit. In the spire of judgment, the High Lords of Terror argued. Panic gripped their voices. Fear stained their robes. "The Custodes have gone rogue," barked the master of the Administratum. "The Phalanx is aligning its weapons." The Astronomicon flickered for 3 seconds last night. 3 seconds. "We must restore order." But no order came, because standing in the chamber, silent and still, were 2 Custodes. Not threatening, just present. And in their silence, the High Lords realized the truth. They were no longer in control. On Luna, the old cradle vaults opened. Thousands of dormant Custodes, stored in stasis since the heresy, emerged, silent, golden, and waiting. Some bore armor never seen before, proto-variants, lost lineages. Others wore marks of shame, exiled for crimes that no longer mattered. Valerian addressed them all from the lunar cliffs. Vox amplified across the void. "You were made to serve," he said, "but not to obey." A pause. "You were made to protect humanity." a longer pause, then protect it from what we've become. Kairos stood beside him, arms crossed. He turned to Valerian. So, what's the plan, golden boy? Valerian looked toward Terra, now bathed in a psychic aurora. We return to the Imperium. And Valerian's voice was iron. We dismantle it. In the depths of Mars, the Fabricator General received a single pulse from the throne, a binary code, simple, elegant, and final. No gods, only mankind. He ordered silence across the forges. No more saints, no more prayers, only truth. In orbit, the phalanx moved into low Terra gravity. Its weapons powered down, its shields dropped, and on its bridge, the last remaining gene seed of Rogel Dawn was placed upon a shrine, not in worship, but in mourning. The age of the Primarchs had ended, and from their failure, something new was rising. Shia, Domitus, Serenth, and Aegeon gathered for one final rite, not of war, but of decision. Valerian offered them the chance to walk away, to return to the old ways, to bury the truth once more. None did. Instead, they raised their blades, not in salute, but in oath. And Kairos, grizzled and broken, raised his weapon alongside them, a relic, a curse, a symbol of every lie that had forged this empire. Together they faced terror, and together they spoke. No more lies, no more gods, only the will of mankind. And the Emperor, he watched and wept, for his dream had never been obedience. It had always been freedom. And at last, his children had begun to understand. The galaxy turned, not with fanfare, but with fracture. It began on Terra, but its echoes reached far beyond, across the void, into every shrine, every bastion, every hidden world where the Imperium's power had calcified into dogma. The Golden Throne had stirred, and with it, a question long buried beneath centuries of silence. What is loyalty if the God you serve no longer demands worship? In the Black Library of the Inquisition, alarms shrieked. Inquisitor Lord Virion watched in horrified awe as forbidden data streamed into the sealed archives. Holy wards burned, psychic barriers cracked. The vaults themselves, places untouched since the Great Scouring, opened by will not their own. On a flickering hololith, the message repeated again and again. No gods, no lies. The Custodes have spoken. Virion turned to his staff, purged the source. But it was too late. The idea had already escaped. On Macraga, Gilliman paused in the middle of a war council. His second-in-command spoke urgently. "My lord, something stirs on Terra." Gilliman said nothing. He felt it, the psychic ripple of the Emperor's will unshackled, the shift in the Astronomican's hum, the stirrings in the fabric of the warp itself. Not chaos, not corruption. Truth. He looked to the stars, a faint whisper in his throat. "Father, what have you done?" The ecclesiarchy collapsed within days. Not physically, but spiritually. Mass suicide struck its upper clergy. Sermons turned to silence. The living saints wept golden tears and vanished into the void. Even Saint Celestine, touched by the divine, fell to her knees in the gardens of Ophelia VII and whispered, "He has let go." In temples, once echoing with hymns, silence reigned. Not despair, clarity. Within the Schola Progenium, young cadets asked new questions. Why do we pray before battle? Why do we serve faith and not people? Why are we taught to die and not to live? No answers came. Only the faint, echoing words from the void. Protect humanity, not the throne. And in that silence, a new generation was born. Back on Terra, Valerian walked the black steps of the Hall of Victories. Each step bore the name of a dead hero, carved into obsidian, washed in candlelight. He paused at one, Ra Endymion, the blade champion of old. He would not have followed us, Serenth said behind him. Valerian nodded. Number, but he would have understood. Domitus placed a burning scroll upon the next step, a list of every Custodes who had died holding the palace gates during the siege of Terra. Their sacrifice was for the Imperium, he said. Valerian replied, then let their memory guide its rebirth. The Custodes were no longer guardians of a corpse emperor. They were witnesses to his will, interpreters of a silent god. And what they had witnessed was not divinity, but failure. In the lower hive stacks of Terra, revolution brewed, not with guns or riots, but with doubt. People stopped praying. The Ministerum's hymns were met with empty stares. The Arbites cracked down harder, and the people whispered louder. And when Custodes appeared, not to crush the protests, but to listen, something broke. Fear. The Imperium had ruled by it, and now it was dying. Kyros stood in the ashes of an ecclesiastical archive, data slates smouldering beneath his boots. A young adept approached him, wide-eyed and trembling. You're one of the Thunder Warriors, Kyros grunted. They said you were monsters. He snorted. They were right. But now they say you came back with the Custodes. Kyros looked down at her. I came back for vengeance. I stayed for something else. The girl looked confused. Kyros offered her a scorched data slate. Burn the past, but learn why it burned. Gar in the warp, the ruinous powers watched with interest. Khorne stirred at the scent of civil strife. Tzeentch laughed at the shifting narratives. Slaanesh grew restless, sensing a moment of indulgent rebellion. And Nurgle wept, not in sorrow, but in pride, for the rot of belief had finally cracked the shell of stagnation. But even the Chaos Gods did not fully understand, because this was not their doing. It was not corruption. It was clarity, and clarity is the one thing chaos cannot control. On Titan, the Grey Knights watched in silence. Grandmaster Aldarian reviewed the psychic readings, the fragments of warp echoes, the records from the Golden Throne. Is it true? One of the paladins asked. Aldarian nodded slowly. Yes, the throne no longer demands worship. The room fell quiet. Then what do we do? Aldarian looked to the stars. We keep fighting. But not for gods. A pause. For man. Valerian gathered the Custodes in the hollow vault beneath the throne, where their gene seeds were born, where the Emperor once shaped the fate of humanity with scalpels and silence. He spoke plainly. This is not rebellion. This is not heresy. This is correction. We were never meant to be blind. We were made to see. And so, across the Imperium, change spread, not like fire, but like truth. Some resisted, some clung to faith, but others remembered what the Emperor had once said. Long before the rise of gods and the weight of thrones, I do not need their worship. I need their strength. And now, at last, they gave it to him, not as servants, not as slaves, but as heirs. The final image of the chapter, a child on a shrine world, sitting where the statue of the Emperor once stood, shattered by its own weight. She holds a candle. She is not praying. She is thinking. And for the first time in 10,000 years, that is enough. There had never been a dawn on Terra that did not come filtered through pollution, orbital defenses, or the cold weight of war. But now, as the Custodes stepped down from their gilded citadels and into the streets of humanity, something changed. Not the air, not the sun, but perception. For the first time, the people of Terra looked upon the Emperor's chosen and were not afraid. They called it the Dawnside Path, a Custodes-led pilgrimage across Terra, not to holy sites, but to forgotten ones. Places where the Emperor had once walked before the Great Crusade, libraries buried beneath manufactorums, battlefields lost to administratum error, slums where once he had spoken with kings and beggars alike. Valerian led the march, clad not in shining regalia, but in a matte gold cloak woven with Terran soil. Beside him walked Serenth, bearing the Book of Unwritten Oaths. Domitus carried no weapon, only the names of the dead. Aegeon followed in silence, still cloaked in grief. And Kairos, last of the Thunder Warriors, walked behind them all, not as a warrior, but as a witness. The path twisted through ruins and memory. At the edge of the Pan-Pacific wastes, they found a tomb, nameless, unguarded, empty. Valerian placed his hand on it and whispered, "For the forgotten." For the used, Kairos simply grunted, "One of mine." A pause. Maybe all of them. They moved on. In the ghost cities of Europa, once drowned in Mechanicus sprawl, they found a boy, no older than 10, tending a half-dead servitor. Domitus knelt. "Why?" The boy blinked. It was broken, but it remembered my name. Domitus, ancient killer of heretics, nodded and smiled. At each stop, the Custodes told stories, not of war, not of glory, but of the truth, of the Emperor as a man who sacrificed endlessly, who chose silence because no voice could carry the burden of 10,000 lies, who once believed in unity, then watched it calcify into empire, and the people listened, not because they were ordered to, but because for the first time, someone was listening back. Word spread beyond Terra. On Cadia Resurgent, guardsmen raised new banners for the Emperor's dream. On Necromunda, hive gangs laid down arms and took up restoration, guided by rogue Mechanicus who had decoded the throne's message. Even on Baal, the Blood Angels, cursed with the Black Rage, began trials to suppress it, not with drugs, not with chains, but with will. Not all succeeded, but the attempt alone broke tradition. Gilliman watched from afar. He saw a Custodes delegation arrive on Macraga, unarmed. They bowed not to him, but to the memory of his father's hope. And they spoke, "You tried to save the Imperium. Now help us redeem it." Gilliman did not answer. But days later, the Codex Astartes was revised for the first time in 10,000 years, not by decree, but by choice. Not all accepted the change. The Inquisition fractured. Some called the Custodes heretics. Others joined them. Wars broke out, brief, brutal, and mostly bloodless. Battles of ideology fought in the shadows. Fleets refused to fire. Regiments laid down arms. Assassins turned on their masters. And in the warp, the gods watched in confusion. Because this was not chaos. This was human will. And no god, no demon, no prophecy could chain that forever. In the heart of Mars, a schism split the Mechanicus. The cult of the Omnissiah fractured into two, the machine faithful and the awakened. The awakened ceased all prayers. They treated machines as tools, not relics, and in doing so, unlocked technologies long forgotten. Warp null engines, living circuitry, organic void ships. Their new mantra echoed across Vox channels. The machine serves. The flesh chooses. On Terra, the Dawnside path ended where it began, beneath the shadow of the Golden Throne. But this time, the Custodes did not kneel. They stood in silent communion, and the throne pulsed, not in command, but in understanding. They had done what he could not. They had reminded mankind that it could choose. Kairos stepped forward last. He placed a blade at the foot of the throne, not his Thunder Warrior relic, but a child's toy, a wooden knife carved from a shrine world tree, given to him by the boy from Europa. He looked up at the unmoving god and whispered, "They're better than us. That's your victory." And far above, beyond time, beyond form, something in the warp shifted. Not chaos, not storm, but light. A light not of fire or rage or purity, but of possibility. The warp would never be tamed. But perhaps, at last, it could be understood. And so, the Custodes stood guard once more, not over a tyrant, not over a corpse, but over an idea, that the Emperor had once dreamed of unity through reason, not fear. And now, 10,000 years too late, the galaxy had begun to listen. The dream was never safe. It was merely asleep. And when it awoke, in the whispers of Custodes, in the hearts of mortals, in the minds of warriors who had known nothing but war, it stirred something older than chaos, fear, not among mortals, but among gods. They called him Mendax. He wore the face of a saint, spoke in the voice of a primarch, and preached peace with the certainty of a prophet. He walked among the faithful, smiled at their children, laid hands on the sick, and they rose, not healed by science, but by belief. The Imperium welcomed him. The Custodes invited him. Valerian knelt before him. Domitus wept at his words. Even Aegeon, who trusted nothing but the past, dared hope, and that was his opening. Mendax was not human. He had never been human. His flesh was perfect, sculpted in a forge that predated stars. His voice carried harmonics laced with psychoactive code. His blood, when it spilled, rarely, shimmered with quantum echoes of a realm not born of terror or warp. He was not from this galaxy. He was built to end it. The betrayal came at the confluence of 9 suns, an ancient Mechanicus archive world newly reclaimed by the Awakened. The Custodes had gathered to unveil a discovery long buried, a piece of the Emperor's original genome. The hope to complete the Unbound project, a genetic resonance key that could repair the Emperor's shattered psychic web and awaken fragments of his consciousness buried in the Golden Throne. The Custodes believed it would not resurrect him, but free him. Mendax smiled as they prepared the ritual, and in the moment of ignition, he spoke. The dream is weakness. What followed was not a battle. It was reduction. Reality folded in on itself as Mendax revealed his truth. He was an echo form, birthed in the anti-void by the mad singularity, a sentient collapse entity from a dead parallel timeline where the galaxy had consumed itself in reason, a weapon against unity, a being shaped from the failure of hope. His words, not weapons, undid the minds of entire battalions. Your Emperor is a prison you built to escape yourselves. Your loyalty is a leash made from memory. Your will is simulated rebellion, the illusion of choice. Valerian tried to strike him. His blade passed through light. Serenth screamed ancient battle canticles. The echoes turned back on her, shattering her larynx. Domitus prayed, and his faith ignited, not as salvation, but as fire. He burned alive. Aegon stood last. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply listened. And in doing so, heard everything Mendax was. Not words, not thoughts, but emptiness. And so, Aegon answered. He reached deep into the unshielded core of the ritual engine and poured in his memory. Not of battles, or brothers, or failures, but of Kairos, the last thunder warrior, the broken relic of a broken war, who still chose kindness. And that was enough. The ritual collapsed, not in failure, but in rebirth. Mendax screamed, not in pain, but in rejection. The genome shard awakened, and in that instant, a whisper filled the universe. Not loud, not commanding, but present. I remember you. The warp convulsed, the eye of terror flickered, the Astronomicon brightened, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the throne shifted, not crumbling, not rising, but changing. Its gold flaked to ash, its light dimmed to warmth, and upon its seat something stirred. Not a god, not a man, but a choice. Mendax fled. Reality bent to his passage, but he was not chased. He was not hunted. He was outlived. Serenth lived, though voiceless. Domitus perished, but his ashes were spread upon the soil of Europa, where the servitor still waited. Valerian, broken, wandered terror in silence, until one day a child asked his name, and he remembered. Aegon did not return. Some say he dissolved into the ritual flame, becoming part of the throne's new song. Others say he watches still in places where thought fails and hope begins. Across the Imperium, the dream fractured, but it did not die. For dreams are not built from certainty. They are born from doubt. And now the Custodes understood. They were not guardians of a man, nor even of an idea. They were guardians of a question. Could humanity be more than its past? And was that worth dying for? The dawn-side path was closed, but another began. No longer did the Custodes walk ahead. Now they walked among, not above, not beyond, just beside. And sometimes, in the quiet between stars, when the void listens, the Emperor dreams. The Hall of Echoes was not a place of worship. It was a vault of unanswered questions. Here, beneath the surface of Luna, buried deep in hollowed adamantium strata, forgotten even by the Adeptus Terra, lay the last voices of the Emperor's will. Not sermons, not commands, just choices. Choices too heavy for the Imperium to accept, too dangerous to be remembered, and too true to be forgotten. And the edict had not been spoken in 10 millennia, not since the burning of Prospero, not since the Custodes first turned inward, sealing themselves in gilded silence, not since the Emperor ceased to speak. But now the throne hummed with heat. Its golden limbs flickered with strange movement, and on the lips of the Adeptus Custodes, one word returned, ancient, sacred, and unspeakably dangerous. Excordium. Release the dream. Aegon was gone. Mendax had fled into the dark vale, pursued only by memory and the guilt of the awakened. Serenth rebuilt her voice, one syllable at a time, singing the rites of fire into the minds of new aspirants. Valerian knelt no more. He stood, silent, within the Hall of Echoes, and beside him, at last, he returned. Kairos, not in armor, not in chains, but clothed in grey, the colour of dust. The Thunder Warrior had not died. He had waited. And now, as the final edict was prepared, the forgotten son of unity stepped into the light of a future that had never included him. It was never about salvation, Kairos said, voice low, eyes hollow with years uncounted. Only survival, and we never asked what it cost. The edict was not a weapon. It was a mirror, a psychic construct forged from the Emperor's original neural map, preserved in the unbound genome, completed now by Aegeon's final act. To activate it meant surrender. To activate it meant the Emperor would awaken, not as a god, but as he once was, fallible, brilliant, human. But to do so would dissolve the Imperium as it was, its faith, its myths, its purpose. What is a god, once you've heard him doubt? The Custodes divided. Half stood with Valerian, silent, resolute, willing to shatter the illusion to free their liege from his eternal cage. Half stood with Serenth, fierce, faithful, believing that the Imperium could not survive truth. The choice lay not in battle, but in belief. Kairos, standing between them, raised no weapon. He merely spoke. The Emperor is not your god. He is not your father. He is not your destiny. He is your reflection, and reflections break when we forget how to see. No one moved. Not even the stars, it seemed, dared spin. The vault opened. Within, the final node. A living data core, grown from neurobiosynapse architecture seeded in the Emperor's brain during the Unification Wars. It pulsed softly. It waited. Valerian approached, hand trembling. Not from fear, but from clarity. He did not ask permission. He did not pray. He simply remembered. The faces of brothers lost. The wars without end. The silence of a throne that had become a tomb. And above all, the voice of a man once long ago who had said, "We are not made to be worshipped. We are made to build." He touched the core. It sang. Across Terra, sirens failed. Systems cracked. The Astronomicon dimmed, not extinguished, but changed, no longer burning a path through the warp, but inviting one. Across the galaxy, astropaths screamed, and then laughed. The Emperor opened his eyes. They were not golden, not divine. They were tired, but awake. He saw Valerian. He saw Serenth. He saw Kairos. And he wept, not in sadness, but in relief. I remember. The palace shuddered, not in collapse, but in release. The throne dissolved, atom by atom, returning to the air from which it had once been forged. The ecclesiarchy screamed in terror. The Inquisition readied weapons, but the Custodes stood, unmoving, and at the center of it all, he stood. Not a god, not a king, just a man, flawed, broken, and finally free. The dream must end, he said, so something real may begin. Across the stars, entire systems fell silent. Others ignited in rebellion. Many more simply watched, awaiting the next word. But there was none. Only breath. The first breath of a galaxy without a god. The first breath of a future that did not begin in control, but in uncertainty. And above them all, one final custodian walked the stars. Neither loyalist nor rebel, neither guardian nor servant. He bore no name, only a question. Who are we without him? And wherever he walked, the stars bent to listen. The throne is gone. The golden light that once crowned the skyline of terror no longer burns. Its spires have crumbled into dust, swallowed by the very earth it once ruled from. What remains is not ruin, but emptiness, a space unclaimed, unshaped, and unbearably quiet. There is no war here, not anymore. Only aftermath, only memory. It began with silence, not the silence of death, but of uncertainty, of a galaxy that had always known its gods by the crack of bolter fire, by sermons carved in blood, by the glow of an astronomicon that pointed the way forward, even as it seared every soul it touched. Now, the beacon is gone, the light is off, and all that remains is choice. Kyros stood alone on the Ashen Plateau, once the great landing site of the Terran legions. No banners remained, no marble, no iron gates or imperial salutes, just scorched black stone, etched with the footprints of 100,000 warriors who would never return. He did not cry. He had no tears left, only the weight of centuries behind his gaze. He was never supposed to last forever, Kyros whispered to the wind, only long enough to teach us how to stand without him. A lesson too long delayed, a truth too bitter for empires to drink. But now there was no empire, not as it was. Valerian walked the ruins in silence, armor cracked, helmet discarded. He no longer marched as a custodian. He no longer guarded a throne. He no longer served. He simply was. A man of golden skin and sorrowed eyes. A relic of an age that had passed into myth even as it still breathed. And though the galaxy would remember him as one of the emperors chosen, he knew the truth. We were chosen to protect humanity, he murmured, and we mistook the emperor for its soul. In the shattered halls beneath the earth, Serenth sang alone. Her choir was gone, lost to fire or to madness or to faith. But her voice remained, software lamenting. She sang not to praise, but to mourn, to name the names of all those who had given their lives, not in service of justice, but of silence. And as her song drifted upward, through broken ceilings and scattered ruins, it was caught by the wind, carried beyond Luna, beyond Sol, beyond the Imperium that had been. And what of the Emperor? He walked, not as a god, not as a king, but as a man, through the ruins of his empire, through the shadows of all he had built. He did not raise his hand to command. He did not speak in thunder or flame. He listened to the cries, to the confusion, to the new voices rising in place of the old. For 10,000 years, he had dreamed of unity, and now, awake, he saw what his unity had become, and he let it go. I was never meant to rule, he confessed to no one, only to begin. The galaxy fractured, not in chaos but in awakening. Some systems fell to ruin, yes. Others thrived, free from the gravity of ancient laws, free to falter, free to grow, free to dream without command. Some called it heresy, some called it liberation. Most simply called it life. The Custodes, what few remained, cast aside their titles. Some returned to Terra, not to rebuild, but to guard its memory. Others vanished into the void, seeking new causes, new meaning, no longer bound by the myth of perfection. Valerian became a teacher, known only as the Quiet One, in a nameless world of ash and orchids. Serenth wandered among the stars, her song growing louder, richer, filled with sorrow and hope. And Kyros disappeared. Some say he walked beyond the edges of the galaxy. Some say he finally slept. Others say he became a myth again, not as a warrior, but as a warning. In time, the stars brightened again, not from beacons, not from warp light, but from new fires, from cities rebuilt without banners, from voices raised not in praise, but in conversation. The Imperium ended not with fire, not with collapse, but with a breath, and in that breath, the galaxy began again, unshaped, untamed, unknown. This is how the dream ends, not in glory, not in damnation, but in silence, and the slow, steady heartbeat of a universe that no longer kneels. The Emperor was never divine. He was only first, and now we are what comes after.